Hello, I'm Sarah Napoli, and I serve as the president and CEO of the San Diego Police Foundation, a charitable organization that engages the community in supporting our men and women in blue. We support the San Diego Police Department by providing equipment, outreach, and training. This is an example of a training program. It's called Safety for All. Today, we are in the Trace Evidence Room of the San Diego Police Department headquarters. It's Crime Lab. And here we will see how the professionals that work 24/7 solve crimes to keep San Diego safe. Of course, we couldn't bring you such a program without the support of generous individuals and organizations. So I want to give a shout out to our anchor sponsors, Adriana and Cristiano Amon. We also thank Qualcomm and Barbie and Dan Spinazzola. Thank you also to VCA Animal Hospitals and Securitas USA San Diego. Without the support of individuals and organizations like this and the participation of you at home, we could not do this program. While we're here, be sure to type into the chat box your questions because we'll have a live Q&A session after this program, so stay tuned. Now we're going to take an overview of the Crime Lab, how it fits into the overall picture of safety for all, and to do that, please welcome Assistant Chief Paul Connolly.
The City of San Diego is one of the safest large cities in the country, in part because of the work of our entire San Diego Police Department team. The components of that team are the relationships that our police officers have with our community, the great intelligence-led policing that our officers do, and the great work from our crime laboratory. Our crime laboratory is obviously an invaluable part of our team, and we would not have the solvability rate for the crimes that occur in San Diego without them. Latent prints, DNA, forensic technology, ballistic technology, and of course our crime scene unit.
I've always wanted to be in forensics. My grandfather was a police officer, and so from the time I was little, I wanted to be just like him. And he didn't want his little girl going into law enforcement. He had been injured on the job, so he redirected me towards the science part of it. He's like, don't you want to be like the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew, you know, all these using science to solve crime, and I thought that was the coolest thing. So I grew up wanting to be in forensics even back in the days when people didn't know what that was, and people thought it was kind of a little odd as a 6-year-old telling people that that's what I wanted to do, but that I've been wanting to do this almost my entire life. So obviously we can't take you out to a real crime scene, but this is our version of it for today. Everything in forensics starts with the crime scene, and it starts with the evidence. So we begin by getting a call out, we respond, and our crime scene specialists, their job is to go out and take photographs and collect any type of evidence, including DNA swabs, fingerprints, anything that's going to help us solve the crime that will later be transferred over to the crime lab itself for processing later on. So Lauren is processing for fingerprints. Those fingerprints will eventually be lifted off of those surfaces and taken to our latent print unit where they can do comparisons and try to determine who had actually touched that surface at the crime scene. Cartridge cases will actually first go to the DNA unit for this process that we have where we soak them to get DNA, and then they proceed on to the firearms unit for comparisons. Hairs and fibers go to trace, drugs go over to chemistry. Each unit has their own specialty, but it all starts with the evidence that we get at the crime scene.
My name is Tom Washington. I'm a crime scene specialist supervisor. I've been in the unit for 3 months. Prior to that, I was a crime scene specialist for 3 years, and I've been in latent prints for the last 20 years.
We get Tom's group involved from the very start. We actually feel like the lab personnel are kind of an offshoot of the homicide unit. From the very beginning, there is a crime scene specialist, one of Tom's people, is at the homicide briefing with us. And it's not just homicides, it's also in custody deaths or officer-involved shootings. So from the very start and from every step throughout the investigation, there's a member of the crime scene or the lab unit with us. They are there for the crime scene briefing. They're there throughout many hours of processing the scene and vehicles and any search warrants that we do at other locations and processing suspects.
I think one of the most rewarding parts is when you find some evidence that can link a suspect to a crime that will help eventually solve the case. Whether it's DNA or whether it's latent prints, finding that piece of evidence that connects somebody to that crime is the most rewarding part.
We are very fortunate to have our own crime lab because most agencies don't, and they do have to rely on regional laboratories to send off their evidence for processing. And basically that would slow the processes down for us. We'd have to send our evidence off and wait in line while other agencies get their evidence processed, and that could really be detrimental in our ability to solve cases in the expedient manner that we typically do.
So another part of crime scenes is that we do crime scene reconstruction, which means that we use science to figure out what happened at the crime scene. That can be things like looking at blood spatter patterns or looking at bullet holes and determining the trajectory and where was the shooter standing.
Using the inclinometer to get the angle of impact, in addition to stringing and measuring with a protractor the horizontal angle, and using these two measurements we can extrapolate back from where the shot came from.
All of this evidence that they're collecting, the crime scene reconstruction, the fingerprints, the evidence collection, the DNA swabs, that is all going to get gathered up and transported to the crime lab where it's going to be distributed to the appropriate units and then worked from there. Crime scenes, crime scene reconstruction, forensics, it's all about teamwork. So we're on TV, you might just see one or two people doing everything. For us, it's actually a very large team effort.
We look at everything. It's a long list. We look at primer gunshot residue, fire debris, paint, impressions, tire and shoes, hairs, fibers, explosives. It's really a catch-all. I love that every day, mostly, I get to work a different type of case. So one day I may be looking at hairs, and the next day I could be looking at fire debris, and the day after that I may be at traffic tearing apart a car for a physical match case. I recently worked a case involving milk, and someone believed it was tampered with by a coworker. This is something we don't normally get. And I was able to discover that something was in that milk that didn't belong. There was lavender oil and other things of that nature, but it involved experiments, going to the grocery store and buying milk so I could see what milk showed up on our instruments. So it was just, I love learning, and I learned about milk, something we use every day, and what belongs there and what doesn't belong there.
The most challenging part of the job is that you really can't be wrong. These are people's lives that we're dealing with. So it's not the kind of job that you can mess up on. If I was doing a firearms comparison and I say that this bullet from the crime scene came from this gun, I need to be correct on that. If we have DNA that's saying, yes, this DNA matches our suspect, that needs to be correct. So there's that kind of stress of you can't have a bad day, you can't have downtime.
Crime laboratory is accredited, and of course it is very important for a crime lab to be accredited to function. We go through a process through an organization called the American National Standards Institute every year through an accreditation process, and it is very important for us to be able to provide proof to the courts that the crime laboratory can provide reliable and scientifically valid evidence as related to criminal matters.
So I was asked to compare two fired bullets to see if they were fired from a single firearm. I have one bullet on the left and one bullet on the right. So I'm gonna spin the bullet around until I find a pattern. And by pattern, we're looking at these marks that are on the bottom edge. They're called tool marks that are striated. And so I wanna find this pattern on the other bullet if I can. So a lot of times you're going to look at test fires from a known firearm. It could be a firearm that's suspected to be used in a crime. It could be a murder weapon. It could be something that was used in an assault. And so in order to prove that, you need to make sure that you can show that the bullet from the crime scene matches the test fired bullet. And what we're looking for is that starting from the bottom all the way up to the top, that all of these striated tool marks line up. Their spatial relationship should be the same, their widths and depths should be the same, and that looks like it's a good match. Once I have that in one of these areas, I'm gonna spin both of them around to the next spot, and I should see, again, the same sort of agreement. Tool marks are unique to the tool, so the pattern of tool marks for this particular firearm will repeat every time a bullet is fired down that firearm. And so that's the way that you can match them back to the fired evidence. And I would just keep turning this bullet around to make sure that every one of these, what's called a land, and that's a term from the barrel, that every single one of them has matching. But ultimately, I've seen enough agreement between these two that I would call this a match.
One of the biggest myths, I think, is the amount of time it takes to do these cases. On TV, first of all, there's one person working every aspect of the forensics. In case you have the Abby of NCIS who does everything, and she's just working on that case and she gets these results really quick. We're actually a very high throughput lab. We write anywhere between 10 to 11,000 reports per year. So there's a lot of cases and it takes time to get through all of that. Everything we do has to be documented over and over. We have to take photographs, we have to take notes, we have to write reports. We have to have a second person do the work again or review our work, because in many of these different disciplines, you actually have to have two people independently come to the same decision. So there's a lot that goes into that the public doesn't see.
Part of the work that we do includes firing the guns that are brought in from crime scenes. So we bring the gun down here unloaded, and we bring ammunition in order to have items in which to shoot, and then we can create examples of what this gun would produce when it was fired. So we load the magazine, we use our safety equipment, and I'm going to be shooting into the water tank, which allows us to collect the bullets in a pristine condition. We load it, set it to fire, and then we'll fire into the tank. Empty. And then the bullets can be retrieved from the water and then compared onto the comparison microscopes in the laboratory area. This is our backstop, and as you can see by the front of it, we shoot through this, and behind it, what actually stops the bullets from hitting anything else are sections of conveyor belt. And so we use this just when we're looking to test the function of the firearm, just the cycle of fire and actually how it functions and it works. So this we are not able to collect the bullets out of because they're just in there. The last thing that we have is our bullet tube. This item is full of shredded Kevlar, and it allows us to shoot some higher powered rifles. It also is something that we can shoot hollow point ammunition into, which is what the officers carry on duty.
The purpose of the crime lab is to support the criminal justice system. So our job actually in all of this is to advocate for the evidence. We're really not on either side. We're speaking for the evidence. The evidence is telling us, the DNA is telling us that this person touched this item, or the latent prints that this person touched this item. Firearms units saying that this gun was the one that fired this bullet. We're just speaking for the evidence, and that's the purpose of the crime lab, is to bring those puzzle pieces together to the investigation.
I always equate working a crime scene as going to a house you've never been and finding something that's moved that you've never seen, right? Or you know, trying to work a puzzle that's missing a part. You know, you have to try and put these things back together again without knowing what the box looks like, the picture looks like.
There's many special accomplishments at our crime laboratory, but just to name a few, our forensics technology unit is one of the few accredited units in the state that can pull technology from cell phones that is very useful in helping us solve a lot of our criminal cases. We're very proud that our DNA unit created a new process to extract DNA from expended shell casings. Prior to them establishing this process, the national standard was we were only able to collect DNA from approximately 5% of expended shell casings. This process has increased that to 30% of the casings we are able to extract DNA from, which has really helped us solve a lot of the violent crimes and homicides in our city. And our latent print unit has made great strides keeping up with technological advances and are very proactive in working old cold homicide cases, and just recently helped solve a case that occurred in 1975. Because of the crime laboratory, we are definitely one of the safest, largest cities in the country and a great place to live and be.
The most rewarding part of my job is knowing that we have worked cohesively and collaboratively as a team to get justice for someone who can't do it for themselves. Whether that's the decedent that we're trying to solve the crime of who committed this murder, to the family members that deserve to know that a group of strangers came together and adopted that person as much of their own family member and wanted to find out who did this, because we need to get justice, again, like I said, for those that can't speak for themselves. The decedent can't tell us who did it. The family members definitely deserve to know, and those that are responsible for the crimes need to be held accountable for that. And then going straight through from the time that we get called out to prosecution and testimony to find out, to make sure that those that are responsible are held accountable.
Thank you for joining us. This brings us to the end of our virtual tour inside SDPD at the Crime Lab. But we have another great session coming up next month. Watch for your invitation to Women in Blue. I want to thank our wonderful sponsors again, and of course all of our Safety for All champions. We couldn't do this without you. We ask the audience to be sure to fill out the survey that we'll be emailing out. That's what enables us to polish this program and make it the best for you. And I also thank you for joining us for our Q&A just coming up. Stay with us.